Good, we're here. All right.
Right.
Very good. Well, welcome. This is the beginning of a 4-session series called Thinking Faith. You probably saw the little graphic of the sign of the intersection between faith and reason. In some ways, thinking faith is a way of saying fides quaerens intellectum, which is the Latin faith in search of understanding, which is kind of a way of describing what theology is, faith seeking understanding. We'll have 4 sessions on these Wednesday evenings. Tonight is God in a World of Troubles. Next week will be Christ in a World of Humanity, then Christianity in a World of Religions, and finally, the last Wednesday of February, the Bible in a World of Knowledge. Today's topic, God in a World of Troubles. I'd like to get you into the act right from the first. And when you think of the phrase, a world of troubles, what comes to mind in a world of troubles?
COVID.
COVID.
Homelessness,
Homelessness.
racial injustice,
Racial injustice.
I'll say just injustice in general.
Injustice in general.
Division.
Division, did I hear?
Yes.
Division. And there was another voice with something.
That was divisive politics.
Divisive politics.
It's usually stuff on the keyboard that's making it.
Oh, I did that. Okay, all right. We're still doing a little technical. Other things that come to mind, a world of troubles.
Wars.
Hostility.
War, what was that? War and what?
Hostility.
Hostility.
Greed,
Greed. We have had quite an onslaught of natural disasters. And what might we put up there?
Tornadoes.
Tornadoes, tornadoes. I like that pronunciation.
Climate change.
Climate change.
fire,
Fires.
Fire, yes. Fire in Colorado. And I just heard, as you probably did too, about a devastating fire in Philadelphia. That's probably a decent start. Let me just tell you, I just decided on the PBS NewsHour to see in one evening what I heard, given the theme of God in a World of Troubles. I heard, not surprisingly, on nearly the first anniversary of January 6 last year, threats to democracy, civil unrest. Better get my glasses out. Insurrection, COVID surge,
Misinformation.
disinformation, pandemic, Omicron now is impacting young children, Kazakhstan chaos, North Korea missile tests, threats and counter threats on Ukraine, sexual misconduct in Albany, New York, racial reckoning in Louisiana, economic problems, hurricane destruction, bald-faced lying, sometimes called misinformation, declining trust, fraying of community. You get the idea. That was one PBS NewsHour. So the
I
theme.
just watched it too.
Pardon, Liz?
I just watched it too.
Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
God in a World of Troubles. When I think of the difficulty for faith of living in a world like this as a Presbyterian, as a Calvinist, I think of the ground in which much of our faith was developed, which was in Scotland. And I think of the rude gnarled piety of the Scots. Life in that land can be severe. The land is barren. It has rocky soil. There are fierce storms. And here's a story that makes the rounds in Scotland about a Scottish farmer who saw his newly sown seed wash away in a downpour. And the story says he shook his fist at the heavens and he shouted, "If I were a god, I'd be a god and not a damned fool." That's fairly harsh. But decades ago, I was a pastor in a farming community, and so I get the difficulty of retaining trust and belief when nature can be capricious and there's drought or there's a hailstorm or there's flooding. Nancy's and my grandfather, Organ, was a farmer in south central Nebraska, and after 3 consecutive failed harvests, he sold the farm. And what he said was, "I don't believe in gambling. I don't want to be a gambler. I'm giving up gambling." And he became a carpenter. Also from Scotland, Alistair Cook had this comment about golf. About golf. He said it was a pastime that Scottish Calvinists taught their children in order to help them to understand the imperfectibility of life. That kind of realism tending on pessimism and the subsequent theological struggle isn't new with us by any means. It goes back to the Psalms. You think of all the times the psalmists say things like, "Oh God, have you forgotten? For the sake of your name, please do something. We're the only people left to praise you. Do something, or even we won't be here anymore." Something fascinating in the Old Testament is the courage, even the shrillness with which some of the writers of Scripture try to talk God into things. And they complain, in effect, that God is underfunctioning. And there's a history of Jewish praying that is very much steeped in that Old Testament piety. It's very different from Christian praying. Think, for instance, those of you who know Fiddler on the Roof, think of Tevye. Do you remember something of Tevye's relationship to God? Tevye's praying? I'll give you a couple quotes to God. I know we are your chosen people, but once in a while, can't you choose somebody else?" Or, "Sometimes I think, you say to yourself, what kind of mischief can I play on my friend Tevye? God in a world of troubles." And here's another from Tevye. "It may sound like I'm complaining, but I'm not. After all, with your help, I'm starving to death." All from Fiddler on the Roof. Those of you who did Walter Brueggemann, I skipped ahead. Who did Bible 101, remember perhaps this from Walter Brueggemann, who says there's a difference between Hebrew praying and Christian praying. And he spoke of the audacity of Jewish praying and the predominant Christian inclination toward what he calls deferential obedience. Brueggemann says the Old Testament teaches that what full humanness requires is both the courage to assert, along with Tevye and the Scottish farmer, and also the confidence to yield because we are not God. And Brueggemann goes on, Yahweh in mutuality invites challenge. Now, Christian tradition hasn't really caught that. It hasn't reflected sufficiently on the ways in which humankind is invited to assertion in the face of God in a world of troubles. Because in comparison to Old Testament praying, our prayers, Christian prayers, tend to be awfully polite and civil and sanitized. So, today's topic. You know, what we're talking about is what theology calls the problem of evil. And they have a technical name for it. The technical name for the problem of evil is, anybody know? Theodicy. Theodicy. And what theodicy is a compound of two Greek words, theos, which means theos. Are you with me? Theos, it means in Greek, God, and dike, which in Greek means justice. So theodicy is asking the question, is God just? And it also, theodicy, is about justifying God in a world of troubles, explaining God, even acquitting God, because to some extent, our concept of God, if not God's self, is on trial here in a world of troubles. Does that make sense to you, what I'm talking about, what we're dealing with tonight? Do you know the name of Elie Wiesel? Elie Wiesel?
Yes.
Yeah. Elie Wiesel was in Auschwitz as a Jewish boy, and he survived Auschwitz, as none of his family members did, and he became quite a witness to the experience of that genocide, and a remarkable individual. Anyway, Elie Wiesel has a story about the Jews in a concentration camp, I don't know whether it was Auschwitz or not, who actually went about a role play of putting God on trial. And they had witnesses. And they invited anyone who wanted to be defenders to defend, but they had witnesses, they had prosecution, because there they were in the concentration camp. They had seen horrors, and they were fearing horrors. Do you know this story?
No.
Okay, well, I think he tells this story in his book, Night, N-I-G-H-T, but it may be in another source. So his story is about the Jewish community that put God on trial, and at the end of the trial, the jury decided that God was guilty. And what did they do after that? What they did after that was then they went into prayer. They went into prayer after that exercise. So here's the problem. The problem that is theodicy, the problem that is the problem of evil, the problem that is God in a world of troubles. Is God all-powerful and good? And if so, then how is it that there is so much evil in the world? That's the problem. That's the question. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Here's another example. Probably not many of us are old enough to have been assigned Moby Dick in school. I'll bet you were, Nancy. Anyway, yes, you were. Okay. In the story of Moby Dick, you remember Ahab the Pequod, the great white whale. There's a harpooner by the name of Queequeg, and he and his mates are out whaling on a small boat. And while they're in this little boat, a shark bites Queequeg's leg and actually destroys Queequeg's leg. And Herman Melville now tells us afterward, sometime afterward, Queequeg says this: God who make shark no damn good. So this world of troubles raises the question of God and evil. How are we to understand this theodicy? What I'd like us to do now is to look at a psalm. And I want you to find in your Bibles, I hope you have it nearby, Psalm 13. This is a representative psalm. We didn't study the Psalms in Bible 101, and I'm sorry about that. We ran out of time. I anticipated how the schedule was going to go, and that was one of the classes that we had to let go. The Psalms, as you well know, include so many expressions of praise of God and thanksgiving to God, but there are also lament psalms, protest psalms, complaint psalms, and there's quite a variety of them. And we're going to look at just this one psalm of complaint. And basically, we're going to look at it because it's very brief, Psalm 13, but it's also representative. And there's a distinctive order in these grievance psalms. There are two parts. First, there is the plea. Please, 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 help, help, help. There's the plea. And every time in one of the complaint psalms, it then goes from plea to praise. Okay, the plea, it's addressed to God, and with it a complaint. I wonder if somebody would read aloud verses 1 and 2 of Psalm 13.
Yeah. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me?
So here's the plea, here's the grievance, and after the complaint, there's a petition, a request. Would someone read that? It's verses 3 and 4.
I will. Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest mine enemies say, I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved.
So after the complaint, there's this petition, and sometimes there's also a personal statement like, I'm innocent, or I'm guilty. And the one who is praying in the psalm may at this point appeal to the goodness of God. God, please remember how good you are and act like it, or appeal to God's prestige. You're losing face here. God's reputation. That is the first part. That is the plea. That's the way these psalms of complaint begin. And then comes the praise. And this move is frequently very sudden. It comes as a surprise. Something has changed. Things are different. Is it changed circumstances? Is it the prayer's changed attitude? Is it something of both? We don't know. But now suddenly in a psalm of complaint, there's a new orientation. So would someone read aloud 5 and 6?
I will.
That
But I have trusted in your loving kindness. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me.
Yeah. And now there may be a long wait, a long interval between plea and praise, a long wait before that verse. Brueggemann comments, a wait that is in the darkness of death, a wait in disorientation, a waiting until hell freezes over. But the psalmist knows there's no other court of appeal. You simply must wait there until there is a response. But with verse 5 and 6, something has happened. And there's a new orientation. Out of disorientation is a new orientation. And this grievance psalm is an alternative to our more common numbness. You know, we know we're in a world of troubles, but we'll kind of shut it out, or we'll be in denial at the disorientation in life. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes for our mental health, sometimes for Vicky's and my mental health, we say, let's not watch the news tonight. You know, we don't want to experience and face the incredible, overwhelming difficulties and our questions. But the Psalms, and really the whole Old Testament, teach instead a kind of bold defiance instead of a wistful optimism or a cover-up or a denial. The Psalms put it right out there. And they don't just put it right out there. Like the Jews in the concentration camp, they also take it straight to God. And they attest that, I think the Psalms attest that when you do that, this bold faith can actually become a transformed faith. Notice that move from plea to praise. I mean, the grievance Psalms are willing to face the darkness, to embrace the darkness, not to hide from the darkness. And then they take that darkness straight to God, knowing there's nowhere else to go. And by doing that, they open themselves up to the possibility for transformation, open themselves up to the possibility for new life, because this is where new life comes from. Now, let me just step back again and say what the theological problem of evil is, what theodicy is. Here's the problem for people of faith, for us. We believe that God is all-knowing. We believe that God is all-loving. We believe that God is all-powerful. In such a circumstance, how could there possibly be evil? Could there be evil because God didn't know it was there and didn't notice? No, God is all-knowing. Could it be possible because God doesn't care? No, God is all-loving. Could it be possible because God can't do anything about it? No, God is all-powerful. That is the problem of evil, theologically. And with those theological affirmations, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, evil would seem to be a logical impossibility, but here we are in a world of troubles. And it is why the common responses, look around, are either denial, I just won't notice, I just won't pay attention. I will actually say that what we're talking about is not really real. Or a more common response is atheism. Or maybe it's lesser adamant sibling agnosticism. I will tell you that there has been one school of theology in the last, I would say 40 years, starting with, well, way more than that, then, isn't it? Alfred North Whitehead and Charles Hartshorne of the University of Chicago, by the way. And then more recently in the 60s and 70s with Schubert Ogden and Daniel Day Williams and John Cobb, called process theology. And process theology says, yes, God is all-knowing and all-loving, but God is not all-powerful. God works with us and calls upon us to be engaged with God in seeking to bring good out of evil, seeking to bring life out of death, seeking to bring healing out of suffering. We're not going to try to settle that, but you see, that's why the topic is an important one. Comments before I keep going? Then I'll keep going. Okay.
I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, it also, the ultimate, when God speaks to you, is he will help you even if you're dead, if you die, but he will help you.
Okay. That our hope is, if our hope were in this life only, we would be among mortals the most to be pitied, says St. Paul. But in fact, Christ was raised from the dead, and yes, there is a part of the hope that we look to in the midst of a world that is full of troubles. Thank you, Liz. Yes.
I guess one answer that I really liked was, there's so much evil, how can there be God? But there's so much good, how can there not be God? You know,
Yes,
I've always
indeed.
liked that.
Dennis, that's helpful and a helpful corrective, because there isn't just evil. I mean, my goodness, there is a hurricane, and there are relief workers, and there are church groups, and there are people taking out the muck and working at it for years and years and years. There is a horrendous wildfire in Colorado, and there are firefighters coming from all over, not only the state, but the region. And yes, there is much good as well. And we're invited to be a part of those that seek to bring good out of that which threatens life. Thank you. Yeah. Let me keep going with this question. Where did we get the idea that life is always supposed to be positive? I'm thinking of a dialogue from many decades back. Some of you may remember this cartoon. Gosh, it was a long time ago. It was in Peanuts. And it was a dialogue between Charlie Brown and Lucy Van Pelt. And they are discussing life's ups and downs. And Lucy says, "But I don't want any downs. I just want ups. I just want ups and upper ups." To which, not surprisingly, Charlie Brown responds, "Good grief." I think in some ways, this is an attitude that is intrinsic in our culture. It comes in part from our North American experience of privilege. Richard Rohr says that if you spend any time with people of the developing world, people of Latin America, Africa, other places, you can see an incredibly different expectation. Let me see if Vicki will say it, because she can say it as a Richard Rohr aficionada succinctly. What does Richard Rohr say about this?
So I heard him in a lecture many decades ago say, people, and he had just been in Latin America, said the big difference between people in the Southern Hemisphere from those of us in North America is that they expect life to be difficult. And so when it isn't, they're very grateful. And they find things every day for which to be grateful. Whereas in North America, we expect life to be easy, which of course it isn't. And so we're always complaining.
When it's difficult.
Right.
And I think
go ahead.
this largely from since World War II. I think Americans prior to World War II really didn't think that.
Right. I'm with
That
you.
is helpful. Yes, indeed. the post-World War II boom and the growth of the suburbs and everything just was coming up roses. Yeah, right. The Depression was definitely not a time such as Richard Rohr described in North America. Vicki and I learned the language for a month in Cuernavaca, Mexico. And our first week there, we were living in a dormitory with the other baby non-Spanish speakers from the US and Canada. And we were taught by a teacher who had no English whatsoever. And from the very first, she was teaching us Spanish, not knowing any English, pointing to things and so on. And that was the first week in the dormitory. The second week, the third week, and the fourth week, we went to live with a very poor Campesino family, Bardo and Carmela and their children. And they had no English whatsoever. So it was quite an immersion. My fingers got tired thumbing through my English-Spanish dictionary. At mealtime with Bardo and Carmela and the kids was a time of my feeling, for the first time in quite a while, like a second grader again. Well, they lived in a concrete block house. They had no interior doors. They had plastic shower curtains to separate rooms. Bardo made money for the family by every morning getting up at 4 a.m. and getting the chipped ice. No, he got blocks of ice, didn't he? He got blocks of ice delivered to his house. His first job then was to chip the ice into tiny little slivers, and having chipped it into tiny little slivers, then to put a flavoring, heavy on the sugar, but a little bit of it was green, or was it red, or it was something. It was called helado. That's what paid for their livelihood as a family. Well, one morning early, Bardo had completed the chipping of the ice and had completed the flavoring of the ice chips.
To sell it as ice cream.
They sell it as ice cream. Okay, but there was no cream in it. It was ice chips. And I found him reading his Bible in Espanol, of course, and he was reading the book of Exodus. And we tried to have a conversation in Spanish. I desperately trying to catch a word here or there. And he told me, this is a very important book. Well, yes, I agree. Exodus is a very important book. And then he said something in Spanish that, as limited as my Spanish was, I instantly knew what he had said to me. He said, "Los ricos tienen dos dioses, el dinero y el Señor."
Money.
And that meaning the rich have two gods, money and the Lord. He had been reading Exodus, and that's what he pulled out of it. And I heard him and I understood it. And I understood very well that I was one of the los ricos. I was one of those rich people. And he wasn't calling me one of those people. He was just saying, Exodus is a really important word from God, and this is what I hear. Bardo and Carmela took us to a base Christian community on a couple or three evenings, I think, maybe more, in which they were reading the Bible and trying to apply the Bible to their daily lives in their barrio neighborhood. And we were, with our Spanish-English dictionaries, keeping up to some extent, and we're so impressed with the intensity and the faithfulness of their Christian walk. And while we were there, they took up an offering for the people of Nicaragua who were fighting the Contra War at the time and were suffering in it. And there was this outpouring of pesos from people who had nothing, but they saw other people suffering. And they saw that their suffering was even more than their own deprivation, and they wanted to give. And I just thought of Richard Rohr, how we middle-class North Americans think things are always supposed to go right, and we're surprised, even offended when they don't. And most of the people of Mexico, there he is, Terry's in Mexico right now. Most Central Americans that Vicki and I have known, and we knew quite a few when we were in the 1980s in a church in Tucson that was involved in the sanctuary movement. We found that most of the Central Americans we knew have been so grateful anytime anything goes right. So the problem of a world of troubles is not merely objective, it is subjective as well. And some people discover purpose and meaning and vocation for their lives because of the troubles, because of the struggles, because of the challenges and the interruptions and the dislocations. I wonder, do you know something about this? Finding meaning because there is difficulty.
I think working with those children we do.
Kathleen.
Say again, Kathleen, a little louder.
Oh, I didn't think you heard me.
Oh yeah, let's hear.
No, I think I had meaning years ago when I worked with physically handicapped children, good 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I found meaning that do you really find that you're, what's what I want to say? You don't realize how lucky you are when your body is normal.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes you can find beauty in these children. I'll bet you did. Did you not?
Definitely, definitely. I still think of them.
Yeah. So that they in their
Struggle.
congenital problems
Mhm.
have been a gift to you and have given you gifts.
Yes,
They had gifts to give.
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, very much.
I
Yeah.
wanted to describe an experience I had that I was so struck by what Vicki quoted Richard Rohr said. I think of time I spent in India and being struck by people who were living along the side of the road. I remember distinctly seeing one family gathered around their fire pit or their little stove, squatting around their stove. They were serving up rice or something. They were laughing, they were hugging, they were so happy and so loving with so little. And I have never forgotten that image of that particular family. They
Yeah.
knew life was difficult and they filled it with love and joy.
That is.
Esther, you know something of the difference between your home in Africa and what you've experienced from North Americans. I'll bet you have some sense of what North Americans really could learn from people who know Africa. Any comment?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, in my line of duty job, when I visit kids that have been they're in foster care, you know, when you go to visit them, when you are leaving, they are hanging on to you to take them home with you.
Oh my.
Bring me sadness a lot. When I come home, I really cried sometimes. I say, oh my God, what these kids might be going through, that you think that they're in this safe, caring environment, but for some reason, when they see you, they're hanging on to you to take you home with you, to bring
Oh
them
my.
home. How can I take them home, you know?
Really, really? How can you
It's
leave?
really
But you have to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a Methodist pastor who went to court to have his son put into custody. And he did it because every time his son went to town, he got into trouble, and the troubles have gotten worse and worse. And so the father, the Methodist pastor father, was asking the judge to put him away for a while, and the judge refused to do it. And the judge asked, "Tell me, pastor, what is it that you preach about?" It's a marvelous book that was published nearly 40 years ago called Lift Every Voice. And it's by Susan Thistlethwaite, who I think still teaches at Chicago Theological Seminary in Hyde Park, UCC Seminary, and her colleague Mary Potter Ingle. This book, Lift Every Voice, is a feminist liberation theology. And the subtitle of the book is Constructing Christian Theologies from the Underside. And there's one chapter in this book that consists of an interview by someone who had done a lot of counseling with battered women, abused women. And the chapter is about grace. And it tells about a woman who, as a child, was sexually abused for years by her father. And the interviewer asked her, what had this done, and where had that taken her with regard to her faith in God? Had she discovered any spiritual resources that helped her to survive this and come through this? And the woman thought about it, and then she talked about when this was happening to her as a girl, her going down into what she called the abyss, and going further and further down into this abyss until she sensed that she had touched bottom. And she sensed further that this bottom held her up. That there was something coming up from underneath her that kept her, sustained her, and that without that, she would not have survived. But it was there for her, and she did survive. It's quite a chapter. It's quite a testimony. Because she had found that there is something at work in the world that gave her and gives her strength and encouragement and power, even in the worst. Now, maybe not very many of us have experiences like this, but some of us perhaps do. We read or we hear stories of rescues from mine disasters or from shipwrecks or other calamities, and we hear of a strength that was somehow there, surprisingly. I'm going to give you a metaphor, and it comes to me from Vicky's and my theology professor at McCormick Seminary, John Burkhart. Unfortunately, the late John Burkhart. John Burkhart said that God's style in a world of troubles sometimes resembles the approach of a really capable kindergarten teacher. John Burkhart would go on to say that some of us really wish God would intervene in the style of a drill sergeant, maybe a drill sergeant who will stomp on your left foot and say, okay, when you march, start with the one that hurts. But John Burkhart said, consider the way of the kindergarten teacher, and he's offering this as a metaphor for the ways of God. Something is happening. The teacher senses that the tiniest glimmer of maturity is starting to emerge. Some sense of a purpose, maybe the beginnings of a direction, maybe the beginnings of a pattern. And even in the chaos of the kindergarten classroom, she can gently nudge and coax and bring to life what is only just beginning to dawn and be able to develop. Does that make any sense to you as a metaphor for the ways of God? Does that connect in any way?
So at some point, Kent, I don't know if I have a direct answer to that question, but I certainly have reflections upon this whole session.
This would be a wonderful time to share them, Terry,
Well, I was
and
just gonna-
others as well.
Okay, well, I sort of assumed that if I offered that, I'd be invited to share them. And I apologize, my internet just keeps going in and out, and I've missed a lot. But I'm really struck with this. Certainly, you're talking about how in privilege we expect things to work out, and people who have more difficult times. Certainly, was the way I experienced it in Africa. You know, most Americans, if they experience the hardship that most of the people I encountered in Africa were experiencing, they would all be atheists, and yet that's not the reality that's there. But part of it is that life is full of both. It's always full of both. And the question of faith is not so much challenging, well, why did this happen or that happen or whatever? It's more of, well, how do you trust in the fact that this is a fabulous gift? Both are a gift, and that's the relationship that the question of faith is the relationship we take to the fact that life is full of both. And I'm always struck with how, well, your psalmist who complains, certainly in North America, I experienced that I appeal to God to change, and if God doesn't change, then God is not God, and therefore people want to build a golden calf and create idolatry. I want to follow something that is in my image, not the reality that I experience. And anyway, I found this whole session fascinating of how do we embrace and how do we affirm the reality that we have. And I'd want to take it a step further. Every one of us, I suppose, has had those experiences of where we were disappointed, life was tragic. How in the midst of that do we embrace all of it and give gratitude and thanks? Anyway, those are just some random thoughts I've had about this.
Terry, thank you. Anybody else? I'll be wrapping up in about 6 minutes. So if someone else would like to weigh in, please do.
I'd like to say something. So an important book for me, my first year in seminary, was written by Dorothy Zola, a German theologian, and the name of the book was just Suffering. And she really helped me shape my theology about understanding that God's power is God's chosen to use power as being in solidarity with us, empathizing with us, compassionate with us, sharing and carrying our suffering with us, not power as in, gosh, why didn't you change the situation? But power as in abiding with us through whatever we're going to experience. And that really helped me. I actually don't think of, I rarely call God Almighty. I really don't affirm all powerful because of the way that it tends to be defined as, well, that means I could have changed the experience, but rather power with and power through, so that when we're like Esther's example, when you go home and cry sometimes because of what the foster care children must be going through to want to leave so much, your tears are, that's God's spirit in you. And so that book and Dorothy Zola really was helpful.
Vicki, thank you. I want to recall a conversation that the Bible 101 folks will remember, perhaps. Probably pretty close to the end of our spring session before we took a summer break, we were looking at the crucifixion, and we're struggling with it theologically and asking the question, was Jesus executed because of human connivance and action? Or was this all God's plan? And that was the way it was intended, making God the author of the crucifixion, but of course also the resurrection, or what? And we had quite a discussion of that and had a split vote. And I can't remember exactly how it all turned out, but I remember that a couple of us who were present tonight were uncomfortable with saying that was God's plan all along, that this unjust and torturous death would have occurred. And I found myself going to a scripture I never would have guessed that would have been helpful to me in relationship to why was Jesus crucified. And it comes at the end of the Joseph stories, at the end of the book of Genesis. Now, you remember the Joseph stories in which the older brothers are jealous, and so we're going to get rid of him because he's lording it over us, and he has a better relationship with his dad than we have with our dad, the same dad. So they conspire to make it look as if he's been killed by animals, and the coat of many colors is taken back to Jacob, who despairs that his beloved son Joseph has been killed. And then eventually, after the famine and after Joseph has risen in Pharaoh's court because of his dreams and his access to God through the dreams, and as well, you know, I'm taking it. At the whole end of the story, there comes this family reunion in which, this drought and this famine was all over this region. And so the people in Judah were having the same difficulty. They come to Egypt because they have heard there's food here. And Joseph does a little revengeful trickeration to make it very awkward for the brothers. And eventually his dad comes, and there's this glad reunion and this forgiveness. And Joseph forgives his brothers and then says this. And it's so wonderful. Let me tell you, it is in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. You might want to jot it down. You don't need to find it now. I'll read it to you. But as I thought about who is responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, this sentence came up, and I think is a helpful one in relationship to today's topic, God in a world of troubles. Joseph says to his brothers, even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good. And in fact, good came out of it. So I want to close. The Apostle Paul wrestled with these kinds of things also. One of the biggest problems in the first century church was how people as diverse as oppositional as Jew and Gentile, they were like oil and water, could be together and were brought together in the providence of God. And Paul wrestles with all of this in Romans chapters 9 through 11, asking, what is it that God is up to here? And what about the Jews? What's going to happen to them? Where is this going? How will all of this culminate? My own people are rejecting Christ. Where is this going? And then he finishes all this struggle about what does this all mean with the following? Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are God's judgments and how inscrutable God's ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been God's counselor, or who has given a gift to God to receive a gift in return? For from God and through God and to God are all things. To God be the glory forever. Amen. But he doesn't stop there. He doesn't stop there. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies, your lives, as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Now, Paul is not naive. He knows that life is difficult, and he knows that thus our complaints will continue. We are at times close to being overwhelmed. But by saying, I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, to present yourselves, he's putting the question back on us. Yes, the Jews in the concentration camp put God on trial, but in a way it is we who are also on trial. Where are we? What are we doing with the time that we are given? What are we doing with the occasions, the challenges, the tests that we have? In the base Christian community in Cuernavaca, Mexico, where Bardo and Carmela met with their friends, the question was always, what is required of us? What is faithfulness? What do our lives do that can make what we say about God, what we believe about God, seem more plausible? Only the grateful can be generous. Not necessarily because they have so much, not necessarily because life itself has been perfect or even smooth, but because everything that they have, everything we have, is a gift. Isn't that what Terry was saying? Grace and gratitude and generosity really all go together. Grace and gratitude and generosity, they go together even in the world as it is. Thank you for joining in tonight. Next week, Wednesday, 7 o'clock, the topic is going to be Christ in a world of humanity.
Mhm.
I hope that you'll be able to join in and see if other people would like to. Terry, your hand's up. Did you want to say something?
So thank you very much. Goodbye. And I hope to be there next week. And I hope my internet works.
Oh, good. All right. And you're coming back to Chicago soon, huh?
February 8th.